Are you entitled to your spouse's inheritance? It depends. In this video, we're going to talk about inherited property. And if you plan on perhaps using your inherited property for something post-divorce, you might want to stay tuned to these particularities to protect yourselves. Final wishes of descendants should always be respected. However, there are situations where assets that are left to one individual spouse can be diverted to their husband or wife if the marriage ends. Before we get into the details of whether or not a spouse can receive inherited property, be entitled to inherited property, this is the legal code, and on this channel we discuss a wide range of legal topics. Sometimes we look at public policies, we see what other countries are doing relating to their society and their public policies and benefits. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, please don't forget to like and subscribe and share with anyone else you think will find value. Also, I am a real life attorney and I specialize in small business planning as well as estate planning and now moving abroad planning. So if you're interested in discussing any of those topics, there's a link to contact me in the description. So can inheritance left to one spouse be considered separate property or marital property? It can be, but it depends. The question of whether the couple was married or not at the time that the assets were transferred for the person who passed away typically don't matter. However, money that is deposited into joint marital accounts or real estate where both spouses share title and other types of inherited property share both names of the spouses may become marital assets that are to be divided among the spouses when a divorce occurs. So if you don't want your property to be considered marital property in the event of a divorce, you will have to keep the property separate and deposit it into a separate account where you are the only account holder. Also, you must also have contingencies or beneficiaries on that account, because if not, when you pass away while still married, while the divorce is still pending, that amount may become part of your estate, and so your spouse may be entitled to it. So that's why you also have to couple some estate planning along with your impending divorce if you want the property to remain separate in part and not be considered a marital asset. Proceeds from a will or proceeds of a bequest made several years before the divorce may have been commingled inadvertently and become a marital asset. And if this occurs, it may be considered marital property. And so unless you kept really copious records of what is the inherited property in that account that's separate from the marital property, it will be considered commingled asset and difficult for the court to discern. There are several ways to keep inherited separate so that it does not fall into marital property, but you should take the initiative and protect your interests ahead of time. The ways you might do this include creating a prenuptial or postnuptial agreement that specifically names an inheritance as separate property, preserving documents detailing the exact value received in the inheritance, or maintaining, like I mentioned, separate accounts or funds received as an heir. Also, placing proceeds from a will into a trust automatically, and also choosing not to add the spouse to the title of the real estate, or ways that people protect inherited property. Another aspect to consider is whether or not inheritance can affect alimony or spousal support. Both of them are the same thing. Spousal support can be modified if there's a substantial change in circumstances. In certain instances, a large inheritance might qualify. When a client making maintenance payments receives a substantial amount from the will of a deceased loved one, a court may rule on a modification and oppose an ex-spouse who may try to exploit the situation unfairly. Likewise, an alimony recipient who receives substantial inheritance might find their maintenance amount reduced or eliminated entirely based on lack of need, because spousal support is based on need and sustaining the spouse post-divorce. So ultimately, there's a few takeaways that I want you to know from this video. Generally, an inheritance is not considered marital property unless it's placed into a shared bank account. So don't commingle funds if you want to keep it separate. Once funds are deposited into a joint account, it will be really difficult to determine what is inherited property separate and apart from marital property unless you kept really good records. Once placed in a separate account, here's step 2. You will need to plan on your demise, or if you're passing, if you plan on divorcing before if you die before the divorce is entered, you need to have contingencies in the event you pass away that this part of your estate will be going to a separate beneficiary that's not your spouse. If not, by default, it will be considered part of your estate and your spouse will be entitled to it if you're still married at the time of your passing. Also, use post-nuptial and prenuptial agreements that detail how inherited property is treated beforehand. This clears up a lot of misunderstanding. And lastly, again, alimony can be adjusted with regards to inheritance, but it depends. If a party is trying to exploit their spouse's inheritance in order to ask for more, a court may deny it. At the same time, if a person receives a substantial windfall, a court may say you don't need alimony anymore. So these are the things I want you to consider if you are expecting an inheritance, and so you're aware of any blind spots. Next, I want you to watch the video about how Governor DeSantis ended permanent alimony in Florida and how that has caused such an uptick in frustration for many stay-at-home moms in Florida. So check out that video after you finish watching this video, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course share with anyone else you think will find value. The link to contact me is in the description box if you're interested in estate planning or small business planning and you have some questions that you need addressed regarding your small business, whether to trademark your logo, etc. I run the full gamut regarding small business advisement. You can reach out to me, as well as if you are transitioning and moving abroad, there are some estate planning tools that you need to consider before you move. So reach out to me if any of those things are of interest to you. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.